Okay, so I think this is working now. We're still figuring this platform out a little bit, but welcome everybody to this episode of Author Life. Today we have Angie Chu with us, and she's going to be talking a little bit about her works and her journey as a writer.
Yeah, I'm getting some feedback. Let me turn that off. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on Author Life.
No problem. I'm excited to get this going again.
Yeah. So kind of the way I started out, my mom read to me from a young age. So before I was even born, she was the mom reading to her tummy, and she made sure she knew like that I knew was important for reading and writing. From a young age, I loved reading. I started reading really young, but she also noticed that I loved drawing. And so she bought me tons of books. We went to the library all the time. It was right down the road, but she would also encourage me to make my own books. And so some days she would give me like 3 sheets of printer paper and fold it in half and some crayons and say, make something. So I was like 4 years old and making like little tiny books with stick figures about animals and stuff. And that kind of evolved when I was 6. They used to sell these little white make yourself book kind of kits. And it was a white book with a bunch of pages. It had like 6 colored markers in it, and it had like the bindings. So I would actually write out my own little stories and put them on my bookshelf with the rest of my books and be like, look, mom, and this one's mine. So really early on, I was writing, and I'm so thankful for my mom for encouraging that. And my dad and my grandparents are also really creative, so they always enjoyed it. They would say, come here, sit down, show me your book, and I would do the little turn the page thing for them. So it's been kind of ingrained in me just growing up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. I think that makes such a difference, especially for young kids, whether they value reading or not, is, whether they had that time with their parents or with, with someone who really like impresses that on them, that this is an important thing to do. It's not something you have to do like in school.
Yeah, and I think a good part of that was I would see them read, like whether it was fiction or nonfiction. Like I have clear memories of my parents and my grandparents, just reading from time to time. And my mom was always good about trying to instill a balance in me early on. So I was one of the kids who had like a TV in her room at like a super early age, but I was always big on multitasking, so I would have the TV on, but a book in my hand. And as long as I wasn't just glued to the TV, my mom was fine with it. And there were a few times where I was just like binging TV. And at that point, it would get removed for a bit, but I would keep my books. So she was like, I'll never ground you from books, but you're going to do more than just sit and watch TV all day. So I think that's good. Where now, like as an adult, I can kind of have that balance and have that multitasking.
Yeah, I definitely think that's important. That it's funny because it reminds me of our kids. They do the same thing. But we were the same way, like I could probably still recite like most of Dr. Seuss's books because we read them so many times to our kids, or Goodnight Moon, or different things like that.
I need to repurchase a copy. There was one book I got from a Scholastic book fair. I remember I was in the 2nd grade. I was 7, and it was called Four Famished Foxes in Fosdyke. And it was this little group of foxes, and I loved it so much that I managed to memorize it. And my mom was a 3rd shift worker, so a lot of times she would have me come into the room with her, and she would say, read me a story. I read you bedtime stories. Read me one. And I was about halfway done when she realized I didn't have the book. And she was like, did you memorize that? And I was like, yeah, I read it all the time. So I think that's when she knew she had like a little author on her hands pretty much.
Oh, that's awesome though. Oh. So I took a little bit of a look just kind of at your website and some of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it actually, it sounds like you have really meshed your enjoyment of writing with your artistic talents too. Looks like some of yours kind of were in the realm of anime and that interest in that world, which actually we do a lot of anime, and especially my daughter, she's like super into it right now, and that's like all she draws.
Yeah.
Which is nice because we moved on from My Little Ponies finally.
Oh, yeah.
But so yeah, so like tell me a little bit more about like your books and kind of how and why I guess you went that direction.
So, I mean, kind of what you said, it's something I grew up with. So my earliest kind of TV show memories were a little weird. I still watch like Barney and Friends and Sesame Street, but my mom would have me watch a lot of her interests. So I watched more of classic Scooby-Doo and Flintstones and Jetsons, kind of the shows she'd grown up with. And by her being in the medical field, I also actually watched a lot of medical shows growing up. So there's usually themes in my books that have hints of, you know, medical stuff and true crime. She watched a lot of true crime too. So that was kind of ingrained in me. And I would say the moment it got from, you know, here's the cartoon of the day to like, here's a series that I'm going to invest in was when I was 8, I found a show called Sailor Moon. And I'd never seen anything like it. I didn't know what anime was, but I was like, there's something about this show I really like. And a couple of years later, I found, you know, Dragon Ball Z and Yu Yu Hakusho and all these other animes. And that's when I learned what anime was and that these are all kind of like that. And that's around the time I started writing my first series. So I'm on series 3 right now, which I'll get into. But there is a series that I wrote mainly through middle school, like I'd say 6th, 7th grade primarily. It was called The Sushi Girls. Like I've asked my mom since then for an 11 and 12-year-old. It was amazing. It's something I wouldn't really want my name tied to now.
I think we all have those.
Yeah, they were like, you know, typed up like 12-point font, like 30 to 40 page stories. And they were all in a series, and they had that kind of anime feel where, you know, the girls were high school students, but they had like secret powers and they could save the world. So as I was getting more and more into anime, I was also getting more and more into writing, and that all kind of tied in. And eventually I got kind of tired of that series, and it led to my longest project to date, which was called Fab Gang. It was just a series of short stories that progressively got longer that I wrote from age 12 through age 17. And I learned to make websites young. There was this program at my school in 5th grade where we could learn to make little basic GeoCities websites. And I took that knowledge, made my own website, and I would post these stories about once a week, sometimes every other week. And what I did was I had a few original characters, but a lot were characters from different animes. So different shows that I liked. And I'm like, okay, this character's in, this character's in. And the original ones, the characters acted just like they do on TV. But as it went on, especially as I hit high school and I'm watching, you know, all these other TV shows. At that point, I still watch anime, but I was getting into more of like MTV and stuff. It started taking on those themes. So the characters had their original names, but they were becoming my own. Their appearances were changing, their personalities were changing, and it still had some of that anime feel, but more of day in the life instead of superheroes and I'm summoning this card and all of that stuff. And what it led into, because I had friends who read those all through high school and would say like, hey, it's been a week, where's the new story? I started writing one towards the end of senior year of high school, and it just kept going and going and going and going. And that actually ended up being my first novel. It was just that long. The characters had evolved enough where it's not clear that this is this person, this is this person. So some of their first names I changed all of their last names. Even some of my original characters, I changed the names so that way no one could like Google it and realize who the original characters were. And that was my first book that came out when I was 19. So it kind of stemmed into that. And there were 2 books in that series, and then just kind of life happened and I was super busy and stuff. And then I had this idea for a new series, and that started about a year and a half ago. There's 2 books out for that one, and then the 3rd one coming out later this year. So that's kind of where I am now. But, you know,
Awesome.
it's still got that, you know, kind of day in the life anime feel. The characters are very animated, the stories are very character driven, but it's still like the one I'm writing right now is more kind of true crime based. So instead of, you know, this girl has blue hair and she's flying magically. It's more of like these could be real people. So it's interesting to see how my stuff has evolved over the years too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think most authors see that, in
Mm-hmm.
one form or another, is that, the more you write and the more your
Mm-hmm.
interests change, so does your writing.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I know, I look back at some of my stuff from back when I first started, and I was like, oh my gosh, that will
Yeah.
never ever see the light of day.
I've had that happen where like my first series, it's kind of well, my first published series, it was my second series. It's like it's there, it's on my website. I don't talk about it as much, mainly because I was so young with the first one that I was still like super anime fangirl when I read it, and it's so cringy. And the second one I really liked, but it was a thing where I didn't really want to promote the first one as much because I'd gone through college, my writing had changed so much, it improved, and I was like, I don't want to redo this book. I want to keep it as like, here's where I started. But at the same time, I don't want that to be the first thing people read. But I've had friends reread it and they're like, it's not that bad. But just to me, like, you know, almost 11 years removed, I'm in such a different place. My writing's so
Mhm.
different that it's that kind of like dissonance that's going on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions I usually ask authors, and you already answered the first part of kind of where your interest in writing developed.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you feel like was your main challenge? And I guess because it sounds like you kind of started kind of in fan fiction, meshed with your own
Yeah.
characters. So, like, I guess what did you find challenging about moving completely away from using fan fiction type characters into developing completely your own world and characters?
I think it was mainly just that, like, even, you know, the Fab Gang series where the characters evolved, it was still, you know, I had these characters, they were already fleshed out, everyone knew who they were. And over times I could say, hey, this guy wants to do this now, and it just moves it over. So even that first series that I published, it was easy to do because I just had to kind of make the characters my own. And with my current series, the Bellum Chronicles, I started from scratch. So it was actually me, you know, kind of whiteboarding out all the characters. I had like spreadsheets just laying out their characteristics, and I always kept it open. I'm like, what color's her hair? What color's her eyes? What does she do again? Like I had
Yeah.
I had to basically like think of where the series should be 3 or 4 books out to figure out how the
Mhm.
characters should act. And then a lot of it was just going through, you know, after I finished the first draft and really doing that character development. Because I would say, you know, she started here, ended here. She's a lot stronger here. We need to push that throughout the book. So
Mhm.
mainly, you know, making these characters believable, which luckily the response I've had is people like the characters, so I'm glad I won in that.
Oh,
But
good.
you know, making sure they're believable, making sure
Mhm.
people aren't like, why is this person here? What does this person do? But then also keeping that consistency. You know, the second book I have, the characters came more naturally because I'd already written one book with them, but I still went through after I finished the first draft and reread the first book and then immediately went into editing that first draft of the second book just to refresh my mind like, okay,
Mhm.
you know, this character should be doing this character should be doing that. One example, and this is a character who's one of my favorites to write, and I've had some readers say it's one of their favorites. It's a character, his name's Edwin. He's pretty funny. He's also been through a lot of stuff. And one thing I noticed with the second book is his story was fleshed out, but in the first book, he had these really witty one liners that would just come out of nowhere. And it's like the kind of guy where he's snarky, but you love him anyway. And that wasn't really present in my first draft. Like, I'd written the plot, he did what he had to do, but he didn't have that humor, you know, that would come out of nowhere. So a lot of editing that first draft was saying, you know, Edwin wouldn't just sit here and take this. Like, what comment is he going to have when they're bickering back and forth over there? And so I was doing a lot of that. You know, the third book came even more naturally where I'm kind of getting in the groove with that. But now there are 2 more new characters. So I'm kind of in that same place of making sure they go where they want to go. So I think that's definitely the hardest. I have friends who to this day still write fan fiction. They write great fan fiction. You know, it's one of those things people knock, but I think it's really good for, you know, getting your writing out there and, you know, really experiencing it and sharing it with people. But I would say it's easier in that regard because they can take the character they've seen for 300 episodes and just say, you know, Ash Ketchum goes to the park and everyone knows how he's going to act versus I'm making this new character go to the park. What does he do at the park?
Yeah. No, and that's something, you know, when I first started writing, fan fiction was not a thing. You know, there was nowhere to post that or share that with anybody. But I found, like, through working with teens and writing and teaching different classes, like, that's actually where a lot of young writers start out now. Is with fan fiction.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great exercise because it does give you a good starting point. And especially with anime, one thing I really love about anime is that they always have, like, really great character arcs. Like, they put a lot of work into developing those characters. So when you're writing fan fiction, you get to start with a character that is developed and that has a real character arc that you like, you know where they started and where they end up with. And I think that is really helpful for young writers to be able to play around within that and start learning how character arcs work.
Yeah.
And then when they start developing their own characters, they can do that on their own then. And because I know, like, some people really, like you said, they do get really down on fan fiction and they some authors, like, aggressively hunt that down and try to nip it in the bud. But it's like, you know, you're giving young authors a chance to learn their craft. And I think that's a really great place to start for most kids.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like, you know, everyone has kind of their writing inspirations. And mine was actually, you know, a fanfic author who I really looked up to and kind of modeled what I was doing after. Like, I still wish that I don't know what happened to her. She stopped writing in like 2011, just moved on with her life. But her name was Zelda. Her stuff's still online as Lovely Zelda. She never deleted it. But she was primarily a Pokemon writer, but also a Sailor Moon writer. And her arc did similar to me for both series, except without mixing the characters. Where she started out, I found just her Pokemon stuff randomly. It was not really G-rated, like PG-rated, but the characters are exactly how they are, with just a little of her kind of zany ideas thrown in. And she went on for like 100 stories, but as they kept going, the character started evolving to be more of who she wanted them to be. I think she was late teens, early 20s when she started. So you got to read and see these characters kind of grow and change. She was throwing in some of her own characters. She was throwing in her own ideas. By the end, you could not tell they were Pokemon characters, and they were all pretty like TVMA rated, but it was like I was about 13 when I found her, and I loved seeing what she was doing. She was doing like the long form too, where her stuff was like 40, 50 pages long. So you're going to sit down and enjoy it. And that was right when I was writing, you know, that first series, The Sushi Girls. That's when I just started up Fab Gang. So I got a lot of influence through her. And I actually got to tell her this later, and she was like super excited. And a lot of people who find her stuff and read it and then read mine, even my stuff today, can still see that influence. So, I mean, one thing I've always told people, I've had people who've said, they want to be writers and they don't read. And I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. Like at
Yeah.
all. Like, you've got to read, but really you need to find someone who's like your inspiration, especially if you're starting out, and look at what they do. Look at what stands out to you about what they do. Don't like copy it, but try to take some of those themes that work and play with them. And that's going to help you to kind of further your writing as you keep going.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something anytime I work with young writers, I really try to impress is like being a critical reader, and not in the sense of like critiquing people's writing, but like learning from what you're reading, because I mean, you learn a lot, not only the structure and the grammar and different things like that. I mean, you learn so much about how to develop characters, how to create a story arc. Like, you can learn a lot of that from reading without having to, look at the little, roller coaster that you see in like every creative writing class where they, go through the steps of how to create your
journey of the hero.
Like, yeah, exactly. And it's like you learn that naturally from reading. And if you don't continue that, I think a lot of writers do get kind of stuck in their own ideas and their own patterns, and everything kind of starts sounding the same.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I even do is I like to say, like, if I like something, what did I like about it? Like, why did I keep reading it? And if I don't, or especially if it's like a series and there's one that I'm like, it's like, what didn't stand out to me? And then that kind of sticks in my head. Like, for the second book in Bellum that just came out earlier this month, it was longer than the first one. I think it's about 75,000 words, but I actually cut out a bunch of early chapters because on my first draft read through, I was like, it's interesting to me, but it's not necessary. People are coming from the first book. They know who these characters are. It ended on like an action-packed note. Why am I slowing this down and reintroducing them all? Like, she likes to do yoga. It's like, everyone knows that. They read the first book. So I was able to kind of eliminate some of those and just jump it back into the action. But there have been so many books I've read where I'm like, I should have just skipped the first 7 chapters. I didn't need that. So it kind of like ding, ding, ding in my head as I was doing my first draft.
Yeah, well, that's great that you like pick up on that, because I mean, I've had times where I've sent books out to beta readers, and one of my series, I actually had a beta reader who was also another author. She wrote me back after a couple days, and she just sent me like a paragraph, and she's like, "This is where the story starts. Get rid of everything else." And I was like, I read back through it, and I was like, yeah, like, I don't need any of this. Why am I, like, is it kind of dragging it out?
Yeah.
And that was something that like stuck with me. And so now when I read back through, I look for that point. And it's like, okay, where does this actually get interesting? And that's where it should open. So now that you are publishing books and interacting with readers more, and which has its, sometimes it's pluses and minuses. What would you say has been both the best part of being a published author and the most challenging thing that you've faced?
I'd say the best part is really getting my material out there. I think part of what kind of plagued me early on was the feeling like you have to go out and be the next J.K. Rowling. And so I would be like, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And I had a friend in high school when I was publishing, the short stories every week, who was like, you've got like 40 consistent readers. You only personally know half of them. There are more readers just randomly trickling in. It's not a huge fan base, but it's still a fan base. And there are people who love it. They give you advice of like, this was good. I didn't like this one as much because of this. She was like, write for the readers you have and more readers will come. So I kind of started getting in that mindset. And I'd say that's been the best part, being able to say, this is one of my babies. and I love it. And I wanted this story to be out there, and now people can read it. And I'd say the worst is I still have that, like, oh God, what if it's terrible moment, especially for new books. Like, as soon as they come out, I go from that excitement to like, it's out there. Oh no, my career is over until I start having reviews coming in. But I love afterwards having people say, you know, hey, I read it. I really liked this, this, and this. Or sometimes people surprise me. I have, you know, just random people on my Facebook page who'll send me selfies with my book. And I'm like, oh my God, you bought it. And I love that feeling of knowing people do enjoy my work. They do go out and purchase copies. They read them, you know, they leave reviews. So, you know, to me, it's that feeling of knowing this is the story I wanted to tell, and it wasn't a worthless story. It was a story that people are still going to enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I completely agree with that. And I have to say, like, that feeling when you release something new and that like anxiety, it never really goes away.
I'd say
pretty much always have that.
I'd say it's the worst with when you're already in a series, because the first book I published and then the first book in my current series, I had those jitters, but not as much because I'm like, it's brand new. If it sucks, I'll just forget it ever happened. But once you have them out and you have people who like them, with the second one, it's like, I've got this expectation. Like, I don't want to be the author where they're like, she should have stopped 4 books ago. So it's trying to make sure, like, did it live up to the previous book? So I was happy when people started reading it and saying, I loved it. And I could kind of breathe and say, okay, it's fine.
I know. I have to say, like, the last book in a series is always the most challenging for me because I'm obsessive about making sure I can leave any questions unanswered. There's no, you know, oh, well, she forgot this or that or the other. Like, I will freeze up, and like I don't usually like get writer's block per se, but like that's when I'll struggle the most, is wrapping up a series, because I hate the idea of, yeah, like you said, being one of those authors that somebody puts the book down and goes, what the heck? I do not want that.
I know, like, I've had it happen with books. The 2 main things I think of, I won't name drop them because I do love the series and I don't want to bring like negativity on them, but there were 2 TV shows that I loved all through my adolescence. They actually weren't anime shows, but they were great throughout their entire duration. They took a little bit of a break and then they said, we're going to finish this off with a movie. And in both cases, the movies were amazing until like the last 10 minutes, and it was a throwaway ending. And I have not forgiven either creator for that. And it's been like 10, 15 years. I'm like, you ruined an entire chapter of my life.
Yeah, so like, that's how my husband and I both feel about Lost. And if you ever want to like feel better about your own writing, just go look up all the comments after Lost ended and how angry people were. It's like comical, but it's really sad at the same time. It was a mess.
But I do remember, I don't remember what they said because it's been so long. I do remember seeing on social media a lot of very angry posts about the Lost ending. And so I'm like,
it made no sense. It's like, I don't know, watch season 1 and 2 and then just write your own ending. And it went on for like 5 or 6 seasons. So yeah, just stop at 2. I like couldn't even figure out what was going on half the time after that.
I'd say that's the other thing I worry about, because especially with the character development, I basically knew how the series would end and I planned for 4 books and things are on track for that. But the wheels in my head have kept turning and I kind of want to go further. And a lot of my friends are like, do it, go further. And I'm like, it depends on if I should go further, because I remember with Pretty Little Liars, I loved that show. It was supposed to stop at season 5 and everyone went, no. So it went to season 7. It should have stopped at season 5. It should have stopped. And I'm like, I don't want to do that where there's like a clear ending And
Yeah.
I just kind of make stuff up and it tanks downhill at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So right
It
now
is, yeah.
it's a 4-point series. If I can come up with something that gets it to like book 6 or 7 and still ends it, you know, with that same oomph, I'll do it. But I'm like, I'm not going to jeopardize that.
Yeah. And that's hard to determine sometimes, like
Mm-hmm.
when a series should end. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've had one where it was supposed to be 3 and I got probably 3/4 of the way through it and I was like, this is not done yet. Like I cannot
Yeah.
fit everything into, 10,000 more words. It's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up extending that series one more book. But, I've had other times too where it's like, oh, I intended this to be kind of serial, like ongoing, doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
have an ending. Then it's like,
It's
no,
just
this is the
kind of
end. Like that's
done.
just done. I'm done with it now. And that can be really hard to figure out
Mm-hmm.
where that point is. And
Yeah.
sometimes readers influence that, but as the writer, like you really, you have to look at, the story
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
where that natural ending point is.
that's kind of what's going on, especially as I write the characters more and they get into more situations. Like I've always said, it feels like my characters are Sims on auto mode and I'm just transcribing what they're doing. So they drive the story sometimes just out of nowhere. I'm like, this character should do this. And it just throws off my whole outline, but I make it work. But I've thought of things that would be good for like a 5th book and a 6th book and stuff, but right now in my head, it's more of, reality TV. So it's like, can I get the actual plot to extend that far? And if I can,
Mm-hmm.
great. If I can't, maybe I'll revisit it later. Maybe that's when you do a spinoff. So I've
Yeah.
got some time to decide. But,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing about writing and publishing now is it's pretty fluid.
yeah,
It gives you that room to experiment a little bit.
for sure.
So, and I know, you have other things going on aside from writing, you work, you have other things going on. So I always like to ask people, if you had unlimited time and no other commitments and responsibilities, what would you want to write? Like, do you have a project that you kind of keep in the back of your mind, like one day I'll get to that, or what
Yeah.
would you do if you could spend as much time writing as possible?
I would say a lot of my kind of like one shot book ideas that I have, like whenever I'm writing, I feel like I should be writing my series and getting the series out. I'm going to lose steam if I don't do it, or I'm going to lose readers. And like right now has been, a little bit of a break for me. I'm putting out, because I've been in the anime convention scene for 11 years this year. I know a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and we do big travel groups of like 30 people. So I'm actually writing like a book helping people, with the con scene, but also some of the funny, like this should never happen again, but it was hilarious kind of moments. And one of my best friends from high school that I'm still in contact with, she's an author and she designed the cover for me. And I was originally going to write this book and have it come out like a year ago, but I was full steam ahead with book 2. And I'm like, let me do this first. Let me do this first. And she understood. She's a writer too, so she knows how it is. But I'm working on it now, and I'm in between books. So it's like, okay, I can get a small break from my series. This book's not going to take long to write, but I immediately have to hop back into it. And there have been some projects I've just been holding on to for years. I think the biggest example is one of the assignments I had in college. We had a fairy tales and folklore course for our independent study. It was a level 300, and we spent most of it learning about fairy tales. We went over the journey of the hero and stuff like that. And the last assignment was to write your own fairy tale. And we asked her like how long, and she's an author herself. She was like, there's no page limit. It's how long it needs to be. Like if you shortchange this, you're getting a bad grade. And it ended up being like 40 pages long. Like it was the longest in the class, not by much. There were a few other writers in there, but she loved it and I loved writing it. It was like a modern day Cinderella spinoff featuring a boy instead of a girl. And there's just a lot of modern elements. And I've always wanted to turn that into like a full-fledged novel, but there's these other things going on, and there's like, you know, one story I've had for literally 10 years that I've started and stopped. It's like my own spin on a vampire tale. I've wanted to do that one. I have like this list of 5 or 6 one-shots that I want to do, but I keep wanting to work on the different series I have. So if I had that ample free time where I could balance it, I would definitely do, you know, a lot of those one-shots, even splitting up my day, like write this in the morning, take a break, do some tasks, and then write the series in the evening. I'm thinking if I stop Belle Om at 4 books, I'm going to try to write at least 2 of those little one-shots before I jump into any kind of new series, just to get them out of my head finally. But that's definitely what I would do if I just had ample free time to write, is, you know, there's so much trapped up here. I need to just get it down on paper.
Well, you know, I totally get where you're coming from. It's actually funny because I actually have this sticky note like next to my computer that is a list of things that I started and have never finished that kind of similar, like they're like standalones or possibly a series that maybe I could start, but I have other series that I haven't finished yet.
I have
like, someday I'm going to get to those.
There's a file, like a folder in my external hard drive called the Novel Graveyard, and it's just all of these projects that were started, never finished, and some of them have like 5 different iterations that go for like 20 pages and stop, and I'm like, one day you'll get done. One day you'll be a book. Once I figure out what's wrong with you, I'll get you into it.
Exactly right. I know. Yeah, I have 2 folders. One of them is called Projects to Abandon, and one of them is called Projects to Finish. And the abandoned ones, it's like, yeah, that was never going to go anywhere. I totally like ran out of steam after, you know, 20,000 words or something. But it's just nice to know I'm not the only one.
So many. I wish I could find something that could read a floppy disk, because I have a couple of those still at my mom's house with some of my like early like age 11, age 12 projects in them, and they stopped at like 2-3 pages, and I want to see what I did. So.
Yeah, what had potential? What was just, you know, random?
Yeah.
It is. It's fun to look back on some of that stuff sometimes and laugh at yourself a little bit most of the time, but fine. Well, so last question. So you're still, you know, working on a lot of new stuff, and then you've been writing for a long time though. So what would you say, talking to other, you know, new or young writers? What's one piece of advice that you would give to kind of, you know, give them a better chance to, you know, get started and not lose steam? Because a lot of writers, you know, have really grand aspirations and they kind of fizzle out after a while. Yeah. So, you know, do you have anything to kind of that you would tell a young writer to kind of keep them going and keep them encouraged?
I would say one thing is, you know, find a project that you really connect with for you. You know, one thing I had to learn, and I'm really thankful for college, I went for a communications major and I was a writing minor, and a lot of my teachers, some were traditional published, most were self-published, but they all would give us a lot of advice. And the main thing they said is write for you, don't write for anyone else. And I noticed I would do that sometimes, where I'm thinking, I can't do this because, you know, society likes books that are like this. And I would run out of steam on those projects because I'm trying to, it's basically like a report at that point. Like, it's something that I'm trying to make. I'm not really in love with it. I'm trying to force people to like it, and they might not even like it in the end, and I've wasted all that time. And when it's a project that really stands out to me and that I'm excited about, and I have that feeling where I get home from work and I'm like, oh, I need to keep writing, I'm in the middle of this chapter, and I have characters that, you know, I really bonded with, you know, that's when those projects get done. That's when I'm happy about those projects. So I would say the biggest piece of advice is, you know, come up with something that you like and that you can keep going with, especially if you do want a longer novel or a series or something, so that you have that motivation to get through. I would also say a good thing to have is some kind of writing buddy. So whether it's friends that are writers, whether it's other authors you've connected with, whether it's, you know, a writing group on Facebook or something locally at your library, you know, everyone has writer's block that they'll come up with. I have little methods that I use to get around it, but I have to make sure it works. So kind of the main method I use, the band Gorillaz, like the animated band, they had a tell-all book come out about the band when I was in high school. And the creator said when they get stuck, what they do is put like 10 random ideas on Post-it notes and stick them on their fridge, and they throw a magnet, whatever it lands on is their next song. And so I don't go to that extreme, but if I'm stuck and it's been like a day, I think I either skip ahead and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this next part and go back to it, or I say, okay, this character is the main focus right now. What's something that they would have randomly happen? And if I have an idea from that, I can tap in with my group and say, okay, you know these characters, you know the story. If this happens, is this too weird? Like, if this is what I'm thinking. And most of the time, they're like, no, that works. Keep going, keep going. And they'll even give me some feedback and say, oh, make sure you do this too. But sometimes they're like, no, that's way too cliche. Don't ever do that. So I'd say having, you know, people to bounce those ideas off, that really helps. There's sometimes, you know, the person I'm talking to doesn't even really weigh in, but just being able to talk to them and me just kind of going starts generating my own ideas. And it's mainly thanks for listening to me instead of thanks for talking to me. So, you know, number one, write for you. Number two, have some kind of circle to share your stuff with, especially beta readers, you know, different publishing techniques, finding different people to do different things, different editors. I'd say the third one is, you know, if you want to be a writer, just write. I think the biggest kind of pitfall for me, you know, being so young with my first series, is I kind of did it and knew I had to market, but kind of expected things to just happen. And then I would see other, you know, other indie authors from my hometown get started and pass me in success, like way more than I had gotten. And I asked one of them, I was like, how did you do this? And she was like, okay, you wrote one book at 18 and you waited 3 years, and then you wrote another one and you hate the first one and you don't really promote them anywhere. So she was like, you're not going to get anywhere. And she was like, what I had to do was pump out 2 in my series quickly, let people know the third's coming, let them know there are 5 in the series, and then get tables at library events and author events and conventions and put my books out there and have people take pictures with me there and tag me on Instagram and Twitter. And as my name's getting out there and as people are seeing it, that's going to help generate interest. And so with this series, I've been doing a lot of that, and it's helped out a lot. I've reached out to friends who I know own like local bookstores, and I've done book signings at those. You know, I've had friends, you know, be beta readers and on day one post, hey, you've got to check out this book. It's so good, blah, 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 blah. You know, I've been encouraging people to leave Amazon reviews. Before I would just be like, oh, one appeared. Now I'm like, if you read this, leave a review. Like, it can be like 3 or 4 stars. I don't care. Just leave a review so people can see people bought it. And, you know, doing that, I'm getting a lot more traction. So I'd say that's the third most important thing. You know, don't just write one and sit on it and kind of wait for something to happen. You know, people want to see, they're going to invest their time into something worthwhile. So, you know, hit the ground running, whether it's a series or just a second book, get that second one out. That's going to allow you to start getting those tables because you got at least 2. And a lot of libraries will let you do free events. And, you know, a lot of local bookstores want you to come in because you're driving in more traffic. So, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to people. And, you know, say, hey, let me help you, you help me, and that's going to get your book out. And I'd say the fourth and last point, when you're doing any kind of event like that, have something to make your table stand out. I know for me, when I go to a convention, whether people are selling books or shirts or crafts they've done or jewelry, you know, if it's just someone sitting at their table playing on their phone and it's just, here's my stuff, I might glance at it, but I keep walking. But the booths where they've got a speaker and they've got rave music playing and they've got a big poster, and as you walk by, they're like, hey, come check out my stuff. I'm going to come over. I'm going to engage with them. So I would say, you know, make your table inviting, put some kind of music. Vistaprint always has amazing deals. Get some business cards, get some posters, and put those up. And for anyone who is, you know, really introverted, most authors I know are not extroverted like me, you know, grab a couple buddies and play off each other. Say, you know, hey, will you keep me company at my booth today? And that's going to help you be more inviting. If you've got an extroverted friend, they'll call the people over for you to help them out. And, you know, that's going to get yourself in front of people's faces. And if I can get someone to my table, I make sure at a minimum they leave with a business card and that they leave with their email address on my mailing list. And that way I'm at least going to keep, you know, in their line of sight. If they buy a book, that's great. That's what I want. But at least they've got a way to contact me and I've got a way to contact them.
And I would say everything you just thought about, especially doing like events or conventions. I mean, I think the same thing applies to how you interact online.
Yeah.
So much of marketing for books, you know, it's online, it's digital, especially like for people who are in smaller towns and don't have access to a lot of like in-person type things. But it's the same, you know, it's building that community, building a loyal fan base, you know, having consistent interactions to where, you know, they know you're there and you're invested. So then they become invested. Like they want to be your friend. And that's something that I think is way different over the last, you know, couple decades of traditional publishing, is that you do like you make friends and you build a community with your readers. It's not the same kind of environment that it used to be. And I think you can definitely take advantage of that and use that to your benefit to really, you know, build a readership that is going to stay engaged over the long term and not just, you know, fly by kind of book buyers here and there. They get fun and you never see them again. Like you really have a chance to build your own community. And I think that's really neat. That's been a really fun part of being an author.
I'd say, like, I mean, even just me personally thinking of readers I enjoy, you know, I'd say up to like 10 years ago, it's like, if you like a book, unless they're a fan fiction author, you have no chance of talking to them. And even a lot of times the ones who are posting fan fiction, you don't have a way to contact them. Like after reading her stuff for, I'd say 6 years, that's how long it took me to finally talk to Lovely Zelda and say, you've been like my biggest inspiration. And that's when she made a Twitter and I could actually reach out to her. And nowadays, you know, most authors I enjoy, I can reach out to them on Twitter or Facebook and Instagram, and a lot of them interact back. Even if it's just a like, it's like, okay, I know you saw my comment at least. But a lot of them will actually type back and say, you know, great, I'm glad you enjoyed my book. And I've had that happen to me, whether it's about writing or I've seen it happen, you know, on YouTube. I haven't been as active on YouTube in the past few years. They've made a bunch of changes. But, you know, I had people that I didn't even think about it. They would leave a comment and I would respond and they would say, whoa, like, most YouTubers don't respond. And I was like, that's rude. Like, I'll always respond. So, you know, it's really interesting how now with social media, you've got that communication aspect. And I could actually reach out to people and say, you know, hey, thanks for posting, you know, a link to my book. You know, that was really cool. And they can talk to me about what they enjoyed about it.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely changed so much, and I think there's a lot of good in those changes. You know, there's always some tougher parts too that come with that, but I think overall, like it's really neat, like especially with the indie authors, the community of authors and readers that have developed, and I think for the most part, the ones who view it as a partnership, both with other authors and with their readers, tend to be more successful and enjoy what they do a lot more than the ones who kind of, you know, take that really competitive edge and, you know, kind of distance themselves from everything. And I, you know, that's something that I've found. I really love the indie author community. And I mean, that's part of why I do this podcast, is just to meet other authors and help them get their names out there and just, you know, grow everybody's readership, because there's, you know, for avid readers are always looking for something new, and you never know what you're going to find next that you'll enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I've always noticed that there've been some people that I've just stumbled upon and I'm like, your stuff's amazing. Like, how did I never know about this? And, you know, I guess this is something I would give, since we mentioned like social media can have some negative effects. I guess this is some like a piece of advice I would give to writers as well, is not everyone likes everything. So, you know, if someone gets like their first bad review, or even if it's like their mom or someone, like luckily my mom likes my writing, but even if it's like their mom who's like, I hate this, it's like, you know, remember that there are people who hate Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Star Wars and, you know, Stephen King books and everything, like these big names. They're people who don't like it. So I always try to make sure people know, especially when they're starting, like if someone just doesn't like your writing, like if they're mean about it, they're probably just trying to troll you for a reaction. But if they're just like, this isn't my cup of tea, it's okay. There are people who are going to love it. There are people who aren't going to love it. Like everyone has their taste. So, you know, I would say, you know, keep that in mind. And if there is an author whose work you enjoy, reach out to them, let them know. A lot of times when I do that, like that creates that partnership where they're like, okay, I'm going to share a review of your book. You share a review of my book, and we help each other out. We get each other's audiences. So, you know, be friends with other authors.
Yes, it's definitely to your benefit. Okay. Well, that was my last question. So I'll just kind of give you a minute if you want to kind of just let readers know where they can find you and your newest release. I know you just had a book come out pretty recently.
Yeah.
So just take a couple minutes and just let readers know where they can find you and what to look for.
Sure. So my handle is the Angie Chu on pretty much everything. So I've made it kind of easy. So I have my website, theangiechu.net. And I, you know, have information about my books on there. So all the books, including the ones coming out. I write articles, usually bi-weekly, and I post those on there as well. And if you guys like true crime, I also have a true crime podcast that I run with my best friend, and those are posted on there as well. So that's kind of my hub for like all my creative projects, to make them easier to find. And there are links to the books and the podcast on there too. So theangiechu.net's probably the easiest way to find what I do. For interacting with me, I'd say Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are the best with that. I'm responsive on all of those. Again, just the Angie Chu for the handle. My public Facebook page is pretty easy to find. It's different than my pen name, but my first and middle name are the same. So if you're not a creeper and you want to add me on that, I'm fine with it if you locate that page. But in general, stick with the Angie Chu, like actual Facebook page. I've got my Belle Chronicle series right now. It's got, you know, murder mysteries and kidnappings and romance and these crazy hippies that live in this little creative suite by themselves. So, you know, I definitely am excited to see where that's going to go. The first book, Down the River, came out last May. The second book, Reaper's Creek, came out almost 3 weeks ago. So it's still very new.
Nice.
So that one, is out. The third one, Beneath the Mountain Moon, will be out this summer. And then early next year is when we're planning on Georgia Wants to Play. And right now that's the end. So I'll let you guys know if there's more, but right now that's the end. And then the one shot that I mentioned I'm working on right now, that one is called Bad Con Adventures. It's going to be nonfiction. And if you guys are wanting to either go to anime conventions and learn what to do and what not to do, or if you just want to laugh at some of the misadventures I've had over the past 10 years, it's going to be great for that. And I guess the last thing I'll plug for Bad Con Adventures, the cover artist is Dandy Serenity. She's one of my best friends from high school, and we've kept in touch all these years. She's got her own website with a lot of artwork. She does Twitch streams and her own Redbubble page. And I think this is the second book she's done a cover for. She also has 3 books of her own released just under her name, Dandy Serenity. And she's also got her artwork on an indie music album from about a year ago. So she's helping me out with the cover. So I definitely want to mention her as well. But again, to really find anything about me, it's the Angie Chu, and I love hearing from everyone. So I always say never be afraid to reach out, even if it's just hi. I'll say hi back and see what you're up to.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great to meet you and get to know a little bit more about your books and your writing journey. And
sure.
And yes, so please, anyone who listened, and this will also go up on YouTube later, permanently rather than live, and then on the Author Life podcast. But yeah, check out Angie Chu and what she's been doing, and connect. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
A lot of fun. Thanks. So we will check things out and be in contact. Well, we're already friends on Facebook, but for anybody else who wants to connect, please do.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
No problem. Have a good night.
You too.